Before continuing my critique of Gerard White's Exhibit D series, let's stop and review how to evaluate a typical bare assertion fallacy. Some claims made by conspiracists are simply accusations that have no merit whatsoever. They are purely speculation, conjecture, fantasy. Most are so outrageous that they defy proof or disproof simply by pointing at evidence. For example, if a conspiracist were to say that Abe Lincoln blew his nose on corn husks while he lived in the White House, most people would rightfully stare in disbelief that anyone could say something so stupid. Yet, conspiracists typically count such a statement as a win, because there's no way anyone could prove it's bunk. Next thing you know, someone like David Piercy makes a video about our old friend the Cornhusk and does television interviews. The claim soon spreads across the internet, possibly making its way into Wikipedia, and a small percentage of people will start believing it, or say they believe it, simply because it's a novel idea. The best way to handle such a claim, in my opinion, is by making a counterclaim that makes more sense. You have to recognize and understand the alternatives to the conspiracist's claim, and any secondary effects they may have possibly overlooked. For instance, to counter the Lincoln Cornhusk claim, you could argue that Lincoln would probably have used a handkerchief to blow his nose. Handkerchiefs existed in the 1860s when Lincoln was president, and as president, Lincoln could probably afford to buy handkerchiefs back then. And in the secondary effects category, you might also point out that corn husks would probably rub Lincoln's nose raw, and there are no pictures of Lincoln with a red nose. So, how does this apply to the moon hoax conspiracy claims? Well, after examining a number of bare assertion fallacies presented by Gerard White and others, I have come to the conclusion that the people that make up such gobbledygook know nothing about basic business theory. They seem to think that the people they claim to be conspirators made business decisions by throwing darts at a dartboard. And they definitely don't understand the way engineers and scientists think. They don't seem to realize that the engineers, scientists, and the people who manage those engineers and scientists are logical, methodical, and total creatures of habit. Based on their own personal histories, the mistakes they've made in the past and vow not to repeat, and their individual shot-in-the-dark, I just had a gut feeling success stories, they develop their own bag of intellectual tools that they use to solve unfamiliar problems. And at an early age, they begin to formulate a consistent approach on how to analyze problems, weigh the pros and cons, and make decisions or recommendations based on observable data. They establish goals, prioritize objectives, and optimize their solutions based on whatever criteria seem important at the time. If these motivated professionals were to take part in a conspiracy, they wouldn't abandon standard operating procedures. They would treat the conspiracy project the same as they would any other project they work on. And the more unfamiliar the territory, the more they would rely on their old familiar bag of intellectual tools. They would apply the tools that had worked in the past that they think could apply to the new situation. Anyone who has ever witnessed an engineer work on even the simplest task would realize that. Engineers, scientists, and their management always consider the constraints affecting a project, even when they don't realize they're doing it. All projects, whether they are conspiratorial or not, have three major constraints that must be dealt with: time, cost, and quality. Time represents calendar time, not man-hours, which are part of cost. A low-priority project, for example, that doesn't require many man-hours, takes longer because it's worked around other higher-priority projects. The relationship among these constraints is typically represented by a triangle that shows how these constraints work against each other. For example, to minimize cost, quality or time to completion may suffer. To minimize time, the cost will go up or quality will be poor. And contrary to the philosophy that quality is free, maximizing quality increases cost and or increases the time to completion. The best you can do is optimize for two constraints, striking a happy balance, and let the third constraint float. These professional problem solvers would also be reluctant to incur undesired risk, especially on critical path tasks, things that can't go wrong without seriously impacting the project. To minimize risk, engineers normally adhere to the KISS principle, more so when treading new, untested waters. The simpler the solution, the less risk that's involved, and the more likely you are to be successful. If these razor-sharp minds were involved in a conspiracy of any kind, they would still tend to optimize their solutions and account for any potential problems that might creep up. Regardless of what their project was, they would first consider their options in a brainstorming session. They would say everything that came to mind. Then they would evaluate these options, considering the various constraint models and risk mitigation, to develop an optimum action plan and perform the task themselves or farm the task out to a preferred bidder. So, the most effective way to refute a bare assertion is simply to ask, is there a better way to do it? I call this game, What Would I Do If I Were a Conspirator? Regardless of what the claim is, if you can develop a different, better scenario that accomplishes the same or superior end results, that is simpler, less risky, or more cost-effective, then that's probably what a real conspirator engineer or scientist would have done. And all NASA's top execs were scientists and engineers. They would not be brilliant in their normal everyday work, and then act like total idiots every time they participated on a secret project. Even thinking that would be the case is just silly. Ciao, moon hoax conspirators, wherever you are.